Okay, if anybody's been following along, I have now drained the engine oil out of this thing. I've got a separate video showing, unfortunately, pretty well the same deal as. I've got another video about the compressor pump where, unfortunately, it's pretty much the same thing. Uh, so this is a Wisconsin vh4d four cylinder or V4 flathead engine on a air compressor, and I got this thing used. The oil, looking at it on the dipstick, just seeing what it looks like on the dipstick, the oil actually looked really good when I got it. Really clean and what have you. Even the oil bath air cleaner was really clean on it. And so I thought, okay, cool, great. Like this thing's been taken care of. Don't have to worry about it. When I change the oil on the compressor pump, there was just a ton of sediment, sludge, whatever the fuck you want to call it, on um, like on the bottom of the crankcase. And so when I changed the oil on the engine here, you can kind of tell, I got the pallet up on some like riser blocks to tilt the engine over to the side to try and get more junk out of the engine rather than just letting it sit level. And the oil pan on the engine has actually got like a little sump, if you will, in the bottom of the oil pan there. And so I drained the engine for about 10 minutes into a larger pan, and then for, I don't know, about the last 36 hours into that pan right there. And I'll give you a closer view of it here in a minute, but um, the oil that came out of it in the initial 10 minutes was somewhat clean, and then that stuff there is extremely dirty. So yeah, it's been draining for about 36 hours or something like that. But what I'm going to do is actually dump some clean oil through the engine, which I'm actually going to take the oil out of my oil bath air cleaner and pour that through here. Now you can see this is essentially brand new. It's only got like an hour of runtime on it, so it's not like I'm pouring, a whole bunch of contamination in the engine. Obviously, wouldn't really want to do this. Well, you definitely wouldn't want to do that if there's a bunch of junk in the air cleaner. But look at how much shit. You see that? Hey, look at that. It's just full of junk. And I don't know what the hell this is. But yeah, I don't know. I'll let that drain there for a while, and then we'll dump that pan out and see what kind of shit's in the bottom of the pan there. And so basically, I'm asking for people's thoughts and opinions here on this thing. I think the reason that there is so much junk on the bottom of the pan of this engine and that compressor by extension is that the engine originally, like in the owner's manual, calls for a SAE 30 oil, like a straight weight non-detergent oil. The theory behind that, I suppose, is that a non-detergent oil will not suspend contamination in the oil, and it'll let things settle out on the bottom of the pan. The problem with that is how the hell do you get it out of the engine short of taking the pan off? And like some engines don't even have an oil pan. It's convenient that this one does, so I could take that off of there. But yeah, the from most of the things that I've seen, something that doesn't have a oil filter on it, like a small engine, like a little Honda GX series or like that air compressor over there call for a non-detergent oil for those reasons. The thing is, though, that this engine does have an oil filter. Granted, it's only a bypass filter, it's not a full flow, but it still does have an oil filter on it. I've actually never seen anything like what's coming out of this air compressor and this engine, but I also, too, am not hardly experienced with this small engine stuff. As far as something that would call for a non-detergent oil. And so granted, I've actually already like flushed clean oil through the engine a couple times, but that junk there what's drained out of the engine just in the last 5 minutes or whatever. You can actually see on the side of the pan here how much more shit there is in the pan. But yeah, I've not experienced something quite like this. Well, yeah, I'll pull the oil filter off right quick. So here's behind the oil filter, but you can see like there's a bunch of like slime, sludge, slime, shit, junk, whatever, stuff that's not supposed to be there. And yeah, this is just out of my wheelhouse. Like I said, never seen anything quite like this before. And I'll show an example of that here in a second. But is this normal for this older stuff that calls for just straight 30 weight engine oil? And is this a symptom of, running the straight 30 weight engine oil? Has anyone else had, experience like this and, say used a detergent oil in an engine like this? And just, I'm curious to hear what people have to say about this. But so because of seeing this in the engine and the compressor pump, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start running Shell Rotella synthetic 540 in the engine, with the theory being that this is a relatively high detergent oil and it should help clean some of that shit out and hopefully get caught in the oil filter. Plus also I'm just going to change the oil very, very frequently at first. Maybe I'll only run the engine for an hour or something like that and change the oil. On one hand, kind of wasteful on oil, but I burn oil for heat in my shop in the wintertime, and oil is a shitload cheaper than engines. And an engine like this here is getting harder and harder to come by. Thankfully, there are still parts and what have you for these things. But to me, preserving that engine is much more important than, the cost of oil or something like that. And so in theory, use a detergent oil, get it cleaned out, good, it's got a filter on there, and I'll just change the shit out of the oil. Because this oil having, and maybe someone can, specify what the difference is between like a detergent and a dispersant, but there's a bunch of additives in this oil, that are designed to suspend contamination in the oil so that it can then get moved over to the oil filter and get caught in the oil filter. And so that's what makes sense in my mind. I'm aware that this is a thicker oil than what the engine calls for, and in the owner's manual in big bold letters, it says do not use anything heavier than 30 weight. But modern synthetic oils don't thicken as much when they get cold, as the straight weight oils like this one. And so I would reckon to say that, this oil at 0 degrees would actually be thinner than this oil at 0 degrees. And so this is the, this is the detergent oil, and this one here, in theory anyways, is a non-detergent oil. Because of seeing this with the oil here, I think what I'm actually going to do is run this oil in the air cleaner and run this in the engine. I was reading online, some guys were talking about using a synthetic oil in the air cleaner, theory being that it will, as previously mentioned, not thicken up as much in the cold. For one, I don't intend to use this compressor very much in frigid cold temperatures. Like I don't think I would ever use it below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But even then, if I do, the oil bath only takes a tiny portion of oil. You could just change it out for a 10 weight oil, or, a thin hydraulic oil, like, I don't know, power steering fluid or something like that. If it's really cold out, something ATF, I don't know. But my thinking, detergent oil for something that has an oil filter like that on it, or just change it frequently so that this will suspend contamination to get caught in the filter. But use a non-detergent oil, in theory. I haven't found on the back where it actually says non-detergent, but in theory, use a non-detergent oil in the oil bath cleaner so that shit will settle out in the bottom of the oil bath, because that's what you want, because then that's easy to clean. Anyways, rambling on like crazy here, just because I'm pissed off and I don't really understand this shit very much. But so, like I was saying about how, not used to things that have a whole bunch of sludge in the engine and blah, blah, blah. So, if you didn't see my other video, this is a little Kubota BX tractor that has not been serviced for 1,800 hours. It's hard to read the hour meter on it. And the hour meter doesn't quite work properly, but so cycle it. For fuck's sakes. Anyways, it looks to me like this thing has 1,800 hours on it. And it has the original oil filter on it. Kubota paints over everything and paints the oil filters gray. And so this looks to me like the original oil filter. If we take a look at the engine oil, it is black as hell and looks like shit. And like when you run it through your fingers and crap, it's very thick and nasty. As such. And so you would think that the inside of the engine would be completely and totally screwed, considering that the oil on my compressor, when you pull the dipstick, was actually fairly clean and has an enormous amount of shit on the bottom of the pan and has got that like sludge slime buildup on the inside of the engine. However, if we actually look on the inside of the engine here, it is shockingly clean. Now granted, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it could certainly look better, but I'm assuming that's aluminum there. It looks like aluminum, but you can see the surfaces quite well. I mean, this just blows me away how clean this is in here. Now, I really want to do an oil change on this engine, and I also really want to pull the valve cover on it and adjust the valve lash on it, because I would imagine that the valve lash is pretty far out of spec on this thing. However, I need to consult with the customer and see what they want to do. I'm not doing anything to this until we have a talk about this tractor. Story for another day. But if I do end up changing the oil on this thing and adjusting the valve lash, I will of course video that, because I'm very curious to see if there's a ton of sediment or whatever on the bottom of the oil pan on this. However, I would wager to say, and yeah, I guess wagering here, that I would wager to say that there's actually not that much debris that we would get like dribbling out of the engine. I would imagine that the majority of it, the vast majority of it, would be suspended in the oil and thus caught in the oil filter, unless the oil filter went into bypass, which I'm sure it has. But regardless, I would wager to say that the oil would not look as nasty as what's coming out of my Wisconsin over there, due to the fact that this is a detergent oil. And so here's the oil pan that had the first batch of oil that drained out of the engine. This drained out in about 10 minutes or so. And you can see the oil itself is actually extremely clean. This oil is that Shell T6 oil that only had about an hour's worth of runtime on it. And I had brake cleaned out this pan, but so like all of this here, and unfortunately it's just not really feasible to get a good view of it on the camera. But like you can see at the top here, all this shit. Really bugs the crap out of me. Seeing all this junk in the engine. Yeah, it just really pisses me off. I'll go grab the other container. So this is the other container. The oil, when it was first draining out, was extremely black. As in, like, you know, the first batch of oil for the first 10-15 minutes it was draining was actually pretty clean. But then once that, like, sludge or whatever the crap was draining out of the engine, it was extremely dark, nasty oil. But I've since flushed, actually, 3 times. Like, not necessarily flushed, but I poured clean oil into the engine while it was draining into this pan to try and, oh my God. And again, same thing. I had completely and totally brake cleaned out this pan. And just, what the fuck? I got a strong magnet I'm gonna go grab. So this is one of those mag switch. Fucking leaking oil everywhere. Alright, well, it's really not coming through on the video, but the stuff is magnetic. I could see shit moving around on the magnet, or moving around on the bottom of the pan. But yeah, this kind of tells me 2 things. Is that, you know, the inside of the engine was a lot dirtier than I expected. And like I said, it was essentially perfectly clean on the fucking dipstick. But also, too, you know, even on my pickup that I run detergent oil in, given the choice, I will, you know, let the engine oil drain overnight or 48 hours or something like that. You know, if I don't need to use it right away, just drive one of my other pickups or whatever, I'll let the oil drain within reason as long as possible. I mean, okay, maybe don't leave it for a month or something like that, because at that point, like, mud daubers or something, they'll, you know, make a home in there. But to see that much shit come out in 36 hours, where in the 10-minute pan, it actually looked relative, like, ish, relative to this, relatively clean. But, yeah. Obviously, I'm just kind of rambling on and bullshit at this point, but it just really frustrates me and pisses me off that that's the case with this thing here. And like I said, there's just something that I've not run into before. It really drives me nuts too, because because of what this came out of, that is a very expensive air compressor pump, and you can't buy these engines anymore. Now, both of these run just fine. The engine runs fine, the clutch works great, the air compressor works great. Running them, you wouldn't know the difference, but they obviously have a ton of shit in them, and it drives me nuts because, for one, I enjoy these things and I want to use them, and they're very useful tools. But also, too, I kind of feel like a curator of this stuff. Like, I want to protect it and, save it so that, when I'm long gone, that hopefully there will be somebody else that dorks out and nerds out on this kind of stuff, this old stuff like I do too, and I can protect it and keep it in good shape so that somebody else can enjoy it in the future too. But yeah, if you have any experience with this kind of stuff, what did you do to clean out the engine? Is this just something that's normal for non-detergent oil? Let me know. Figured I'd show you that it does run, and run quite well, in fact. And I've got a little oil pressure gauge down here. When I checked the oil pressure gauge just now, it was only showing like 10 psi. Although these do have a very low oil pressure system on them. The manual says, like, on a summer day with the engine completely warmed up, it'll only make like 5 pounds of oil. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, I'll fire the engine up. You'll see the compressor won't turn with the engine running. It's because it's got a little clutch on it, which is cool as shit. But I guess the last thing that I was going to add here too. So this is a sample or a jar of engine oil that we drained out of a International 466. It's starting to separate. It it got coolant in the oil from a cylinder liner O-ring that had fucked off. And I just, I don't know. I always remember it from, like, grade school, the science teacher telling you that oil and water can't mix. But granted, coolant is not water. There's a bunch of other stuff in there. But when this was first drained out of the engine, it was very, very emulsified together, the coolant and oil. And now at this point, this is nearly exactly 4 years on. I got the customer name on top, that's why I'm covering that. But nearly 4 years on, and you can see it's starting to separate out a little bit. The coolant that was in here was red. I'm curious if in the future that it'll actually have like a more distinct layer to it. But even me just tipping it over like this is actually the most that I've disturbed this jar in those 4 years, just because I was curious to see if it would actually change. But that was, like I said, coolant and not water, and that is detergent oil. I always heard stories of old timers back in like the back in like the Depression era, say that couldn't afford to change the oil on their tractors and shit, that they would drain the oil out of something and put it in like a 55-gallon barrel or whatever, and just put it in the corner of the barn and just leave it sit there for, a couple of years or whatever, and let all of the junk and debris settle out from the oil, and then they'd pour that oil back in their machinery. And like in the case of that mason jar there, you can see it is separating, but not very much, and the oil still looks pretty dark. But I guess I never really thought about it that, if, those stories of settling oil out like that was probably with non-detergent oil. And so I guess that makes me curious now to, maybe take a sample of dirty engine oil, dirty detergent engine oil, and put it in a jar like that and let it sit for a while. And then also, run a quart of non-detergent oil through like a Honda engine or something like that, until it looks, dirty and nasty, and let that settle out. And would there be a difference between the two? But yeah, maybe there is actually something to that a non-detergent oil, if you let sit for a long time, would actually settle everything out, and, would it turn clear like it did before? I don't know. Just thought it was kind of interesting.